Bum, 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 bum.
Yeah, okay. All right. We're recording this meeting. We'll capture the slides in a PDF and we'll send them all out to all the people to put their name and email in the chat. We'll also send out a link of the recording for anybody that you want to share the meeting that did not attend or wants to look at certain parts of the presentation over again. But before we get going here, couple of things. Tonight, we'll talk about cutting through the noise to drive real climate action. We'll try and connect the issue of disinformation in with that whole thing. Why don't you go ahead, Rachel, on Sunday?
Okay, I will. Thanks, Tom. So this coming Sunday, September 21, is not just a Sunday, but it's the Sunday. That is, it's the day when hundreds of events will be taking place across the country and around the globe to celebrate the proven, clean, renewable, amazing power of the sun and all the technologies that we're already using and constantly improving to harness that solar power for the future we all want. So this effort's organized primarily by 350.org and Third Act, the two organizations founded by the incomparable Bill McKibben. But Climate Reality, Rewiring America, Sierra Club, Solar United Neighbors, and all sorts of other groups are collaborating to make these events spectacular. Here in Chicago, our Sunday event will take place on Montrose Beach near the dog park. That's 610 West Lawrence if you're using Google Maps. And again, that's this Sunday, September 21 from 12 to 4 p.m. Our chapter will have a table with lots of literature about climate science and about what we're working on here in Chicagoland. And we'll also have our very own astronomer, Jim Swiger, who will be bringing a special telescope with filters and an iPad attachment so that we can see live images of the sun if the weather cooperates. Um, our table's all set in terms of the volunteers that we need, but we hope to see you there, whether you register in advance or not. Other groups who will be there are going to have
Oh,
things like
boy.
music and dancing, family-friendly games, more information, demonstrations, plant giveaways, and much more. So bring yourself, bring a friend, bring a neighbor, and get ready to have fun, to learn something, to make a new friend, to show your support. We're all going to celebrate the amazing power of the sun together this coming Sunday. You can let me know if you have any questions, and I'll try to answer them. We'll see.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Rachel. And next month in October, we're going to have solar energy. Jeff Green will be presenting. Is there anything you want to say, Jeff, if you're online here? I don't know if he's online. I know he was on vacation. Anyway, it'll be a comprehensive presentation. Everybody should come if possible because the tax credits are going to be running out soon. So if you're thinking about solar, it can really reduce the cost of that EV you bought, last week because of the tax credit going out there. Uh, and then in November, we're going to have a panel. We're going to have three or four different city officials from different cities. We're hoping to have Naperville and Oak Park and some others that can really talk to us about their experiences going live. And then in December, there won't be any a meeting at all because it's usually right close to Christmas and so forth. So if that's all, we'll move on to these
Can I
tax.
just jump in, Tom, for
Yeah,
one
please.
second? Sorry.
Yeah,
Um, it looks like I didn't get made a co-host, so can you try again with making me a co-host?
sure. And
Thank
let's
you.
see, Rachel. Make co-host, confirm. You should see it pop up on your screen.
Great. Thank you.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, so the IRA tax credit, as you know, the one big beautiful bill, which is not so beautiful, is a lot of things are starting to expire. So 30D, the new clean vehicle credit, and by the way, thank you, Tracy. McFadden for sending this information, will not be allowed for new vehicle purchases as of September 30th. Actually, October 1st, it's gone. So that's 7,500. So if you're thinking about it, you're going to pay $7,500 more for a vehicle if you do this October 1st or beyond. So if your lease is about up or whatever, or you were thinking about getting an EV in January of the year, you might want to see if you can move that up, or else you lose this kind of money. Now, not all the vehicles qualify, but many do. And the ones that don't qualify, many of them are being matched by the actual manufacturers with similar discounts. Okay, 25E is the previously owned. In other words, the used cars, that's $4,000. It's the same kind of thing, only it's a used car. And I should mention, let me go back to the first one for a second. When my wife bought a new EV a couple of 3 weeks ago, they applied that 7,500 like a discount right at the dealer. We didn't have to put that money down. So it was right off the top, along with the Costco rebates and everything. So anyway, the second one is the $4,000. The third one down is the energy efficiency for your home. We've got some time on that to December 31st. 25D is the residential clean energy tax credit. I don't know if Jeff is here, but I'm pretty sure that's the solar power, rooftop solar types of things. And then let's see, then we go down to the 30C, the alternative fuel credit. And then we have new energy efficiency for homes. So anyway, there's some time on those last two to June, some of them in December, and some go away very shortly. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so I want to thank Bruce Mazer. I think he couldn't be here tonight, but he and I started this about a year and a half ago in the city of Chicago. So our version one kind of presentation was really kind of piloted in Chicago, and it seemed to go over well. There seemed to be a lot of interest in that, and certainly other chapters began to hear about this, and it was kind of spread around by one of our national organizers from CRP National, and so far between Bruce and I, we've done almost a dozen of these things in different chapters. We did Washington, D.C. last night, and they asked me back a second time because they knew there was a version 3, which is what we're talking about tonight, which is significantly improved versus previous versions as we've learned more about these things over the last year. So why don't we get started now? And all right, yeah, all right. So here's the agenda. The power of disinformation, fossil fuel disinformation strategy, managing disinformation, climate disinformation. Will show actual examples. I'm sure you can do better than the ones I put up on the screen, but I'm just trying to give a straw man example of what you can do. And then same thing on solutions. I'll hit one for solar panels. I'll hit another one, a couple of for electric vehicles. And so then we'll conclude. Look, I've been studying change and the barriers to change along with climate change for 10 years or more. This is not a simple issue, and I don't have all the answers. So I'm going to throw out a lot of ideas. They're secured in deep knowledge about these things, not just for myself, but experts out there. And we'll see how this goes because I need your help to really pull this forward in order to be able to inculcate these things into our own teamwork. So I want to differentiate between misinformation and disinformation. Sir, the first one is the misinformation is false information that is disseminated regardless of its intent to mislead. So something like that might be something, a rumor that a friend heard, and the friend suggests that, is this really true? And you can politely respond to them and kind of debunk. It's perfectly all right to debunk misinformation. However, if we go on to disinformation, it's false information that's intended to mislead. Different other words for this would be conspiracy theories, myths, falsehoods, deception, and out-and-out lies. I like the last one, lies, because that's exactly what they really are. And so in this case, debunking is not the thing to do, and I'll get into the reasons why that is. But we're certainly confused, especially people that don't know what we know about climate change. They're certainly confused because So many people believe it's real, but then they hear about from, their politicians and leaders that it's really not true anymore, and they wonder, really what to believe. So I want to put in a pitch for Science Under Siege, which Michael Mann and Peter Hotez have just put out. And I sent a quote out to some of the members of leadership, and I'll make sure to include this when I send the notes and the PDFs of this presentation. But Michael Mann was on MSNBC, and he said the following: "There's a sort of tripartite multi-crisis that we're facing right now. The climate crisis and the threat is ever more deadly pandemics. But overriding crisis is the rise of misinformation and disinformation. The use of AI to make it essentially go infinite, to create essentially infinite information. And unless we get a handle on this and do something about this, we will not be able to tackle the great threats that challenge us that we face today." So I thought the whole interview was excellent. I think it goes like 6 or 7 minutes, and the link's at the bottom of the page, so you ought to be able to click on this when I send this out. I'll make sure to include the link in the actual email so you can actually click on this to see it. Anyway, they talk about this, and I wanted to kind of bring it together here. Um, anti, the anti-science movement, which is really at the core of all kinds of things, bad things happening in the country, propelled by artificial intelligence, like they said, which feeds disinformation, which is feeding doubt in the climate crisis, which is nothing new, but it's now being amplified. People are actually believing in climate change less than they used to. It's actually deteriorating as a result of this. Same kind of thing for pandemic danger and vaccines and things like that. So things that we believed and trusted in the science now are less trustworthy and outright not trusted at all today. They're part of the deep state or something. And then these things and other things are causing a democracy crisis where it's eroding pretty significantly. So the power of disinformation is incredible because it shapes public opinion and decision making. It spreads faster than truth. Terry Pratchett says a lie can run around the world before truth gets its boots on. Kind of humorous, but so true. And then is now turbocharged by AI. Is like I said a minute ago, it undermines trust in government, in science, and in the media. It treats science as it's just another opinion. You see them, they'll have a client scientist on a TV show, and then they'll have the disinformation people trying to debunk them. And then, as if there was an equal argument there. It fuels division, polarization, cynicism, radicalization, and political violence. And we saw, political violence last week. I think a month before, we saw, a senator in Minnesota and her husband shot to death. Political violence is nothing new, but it seems like it's happened all the time, but it seems like it's amping up and getting pretty serious. It's weakening our social cohesion and democracy itself, and it's kind of pollution. Disinformation is kind of pollution that threats society at its very core. So before we get into issues about change and issues about how to deal with this information, I wanted to show some strategies which is used by the fossil fuel industry using disinformation. So, for example, there was a time of truth from even the fossil fuel industry. Many of you may know that in 1977, Exxon said, "Hey, we've got 5 to 10 years to make hard decisions." The actual quote's up there. In 1978, they said scientists agree that temperatures could go 2 to 3 degrees C up. If we don't and affect negatively affect the biosphere if we don't wise up. And in 1982, doubling of CO2 would definitely hit 3 degrees C. And we now have a scientific consensus. There's no question about it. We have a consensus. That was the truth, but something happened. So in 1989, just a few years later, Exxon said the role of greenhouse gases is not well understood. In 97, they said there is a lot we really don't know about climate change, how it works, And we have time, don't worry about it. In 1998, the American Petroleum Institute said victory will be achieved when average citizens understand uncertainties in the climate system. Interesting. So what was their model? What was going on? What really happened? What transition happened? Well, you could argue that their very business was being threatened by the scientists, by the fact that they have a dirty, toxic product, that it generates greenhouse gas emissions, which is a pollution for the climate system. And so did they have a model for some ideas on how they could do this? Well, I suggest they did. In fact, here's what happened. Tobacco executives said from Brown and Williamson back in '69, doubt is our product since it's the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the minds of the general public. It's also the means of establishing a controversy. So as we look at this, I've highlighted a few words. First of all, so cigarettes wasn't just their product. Doubt was their product. And competing with the body of truth. That's the competition. It's just not other tobacco companies, it's the truth. And then what we need is a controversy. We want to stymie any kind of action. So we know that the fossil fuel industry has been doing this for quite some time now, but they really started doubling down when the election happened in 2024. And so the American Petroleum Institute came up with the Lights on Energy program. And essentially, there were three major parts to this: energy access, national defense up here, and American infrastructure. And these things sound good. And a lot of conspiracy theories start out with things that sound good. Let's get the criminals that are breaking the law that happen to be immigrants and get them out of the country. A lot of people believe that. They may not believe how it's being done, but they may believe criminals should be treated as criminals. So anyway, some elements of truth. However, of course, they're peddling toxic pollution and climate wrecking pollution. So, but interesting enough on their website, it was there at least a week or two ago. They had this that said oil produced off the U.S. shoreline has fewer greenhouse gas emissions than much of what would be imported. So in a sense, they were using and leveraging greenhouse gas emissions, which they deny are a problem. They were actually using it to suggest that their products produce less poison than poison brought in from imports from other countries. So I really think that this probably is already gone from the website or will be soon. You'll see this disappear. Okay, so according to Franta from Stanford Law School, basically said this is one of the most successful yet deceptive PR campaigns ever. The strategy is to put as much blame on the consumer as possible. And what I didn't say on the previous page is, a previous couple of pages, is the fact that part of their issue is how much it's going to cost to get to net zero. And they're saying basically, don't bother to do it because it's too expensive. But I'll get to that in just a second. But that's what number two is about. Number three, consumers have not been in a good place really to control the situation. This ensures nothing gets done. But actually, consumers have a choice. For example, the modern EV hit the road in 2010. There were a few before that, but they didn't have very good range and they were pretty expensive. In fact, you can go back to 1998. They had an EV1 from General Motors, which General Motors only leased so they could pull them back after the lease and crush them all because they didn't want to continue that because laws were changed in the state of California. So anyway, we have choice today like never before because of the science. So the Guardian put out this, which was very good. It basically says the energy security, they repeated that, the economy versus the environment, as if we can't have both of those things, or we make your life work, or we're part of the solution, or we're world's greatest neighbor. So you can see the factory in the background. That's the neighbor, right? So that's a good thing. That's pretty neighborly, right? It's nice and clean, right, for the neighborhood. Anyway, to quote Exxon, he's basically saying there's a dirty secret about net zero. People who are generating the emissions need to be aware and be ready to pay the price to get to net zero. Now, there's a big argument. It was a big thing in Fortune magazine, but it really comes down to, but who's paying for the damages? And who's paying for adaptation? You know, those seawalls in New Orleans, or who's paying for mitigation in order to be able to like get out from under this problem? Or who should be held accountable for the emissions and their costs? So that's questions I pose that they love to ignore. So fossil fuel companies, in a sense, are trying to privatize profits and socialize costs. So, you know, many of the people on the right also complain about, you know, communism and socialism and all that. But that's exactly what these organizations are doing. They're trying to socialize this whole thing. You know, as they take away tax credits for clean energy and electric vehicles, they are highly subsidized. The price of what you pay for a gallon of gas at the gas station is not what it costs because it's subsidized. Okay. So I know this is a little geeky, so I'll be quick. I just wanted you to have a sense of money. If world GDP is 122 trillion and US GDP is 27 point trillion a year, big money, right? Lots of zeros there. Uh, as experts you see at the bottom of the screen, like the World Economic Forum, Potsdam, McKinsey, and so forth, are saying to mitigate the problem, we're going to have to spend 2% a year out to 2050. So for, you know, 25 years. Now that's a lot of money, but it's only 2% of GDP. And you can see the numbers above, that I have above it. And then you have the damages. How much is it going to be in damages? Well, 5% of GDP. Now, some of these organizations differ slightly from each other on these numbers. This is kind of an average, a ballpark of what they think is happening here. Now, what happens if Trump stymies things like he seems to be doing right now? So for the next 3 or 4 years, we're not going to get, heads down, nets, cut emissions in half by 2030, like the Paris Climate Agreement said, you know, in 2015, 10 years ago. Well, what if there's a delay and by the time things amping up and we wise up as a country and start to actually do something about this problem, it's estimated that the cost will go to 4% of GDP for mitigation and damages will grow from 5% to 15%. Gigantic amounts of money per year. So this is refuting what the CEO and what the API is saying in terms of high amounts of costs by using petroleum products. So we have to be smart about that when they say that green energy is expensive. No, it's not. And Al Gore does a great job of showing pictures like this from around the world of all the disasters. And it's pretty emotional, you know, if you've been through his leadership program. Uh, I'm just going to show you this one, which is, you know, bad enough. So let's move on and talk about managing disinformation. Let's talk about change and pre-bunking. I'm going to get into those, but I just want to show you one slide of some examples of conspiracy theories. So here we go. The Earth is flat. 2 to 4% of people believe this. 330 million people in the US. If my calculation is right, that's about 13 million people believe this. Don't go too far out in a ship. You're going to go off the cliff there. 1969 moon landing was fake. 10% of the people believe this, according to Gallup. 9/11 was an inside job. 20% of people. COVID-19 vaccine belief is 56%, but that just basically says 44% don't believe it. JFK assassination was a cover-up, 42% believe that. And belief in the deep state, 52%, a majority of the American people believe that. And climate change is either not happening, 14%, or not human caused, 28%. So in other words, you really have to add those two things together, and it's 42%. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, wait a minute, my understanding is that belief in climate change is around 70%. And that's true, but a lot of the people that believe in climate change believe it's not human caused, that it's actually happening, but it's nature or the solar, the orbit of the sun and all of that, Earth around the sun and all those kinds of things. So anyway, so let's look at this little kind of humorous picture. This is the MSN TV network here speaking, and we've got the host in the middle there saying tonight we'll be talking to a scientist about the solar system, and we need to balance though. We need to balance that with her views. We've invited a member of the Flat Earth Society so that we can have a good dialogue. So this is what we often see in the media today, and truth doesn't really get a chance, if you will. And we're weighing scientists' opinions next to, in many cases, crackpots, frankly. So uh, there's now I want to talk about change, and then we'll talk about pre-bunking and how to deal with it. There's a couple of things, there's 5 things about change that I want to share. First of all, why is change so difficult? So part of this is a conflict between the rational brain, which tries to make conscious and logical decisions and plans for the future and care about the long-term consequences of actions in the family, versus the emotional brain that cares about immediate rewards or prioritizes comfort and ease or uh, does what it feels good right now. It's a difficult situation. It's conflict. And then, of course, when you enter money into all of this, it becomes really a challenge, especially if people can't buy, bread and eggs at the grocery store. Well, now let's talk about things that really go beyond that and really affect everybody here. So the first thing is there's something called the status quo bias. People naturally prefer what's familiar to them. It feels safe and predictable even when it's not safe and not predictable. Well, that, of course, would be an example of climate change. So as we think about our own advocacy, this is one of the things to think about in our education programs to understand this principle and make sure that we get it covered, that people are afraid. And some of the people that are climate deniers act like they do is because they're afraid. They're afraid of clean energy and things like that, that it's going to destroy their business, even if it's healthy for the environment. Another one is loss aversion. So we tend to fear losing what we have more than what we may gain by making the change. And so this isn't a scientific graph on the right, but it does represent a kind of approximation, sorry, of the human condition where the fear of pain is greater than the fear of pleasure in terms of trying to avoid pain versus pleasure. And the next one would be cognitive dissonance. Change has often challenged our existing beliefs or identity, which creates mental discomfort. So when we think about this, if it's about money or whatever it is, so we have something like climate change or COVID-19 or whatever, the complexities to solve this is pretty significant. So when a denier comes up and says, no, there's a simple solution. So for autism, we got a simple solution, get rid of vaccines. Or oh, okay. So all this climate stuff, it's fake news. Uh, you know, uh, we don't have to worry about it. I mean, that's so people will tend to line up about the reassuring lie. And in fact, Al Gore did a great video years ago now. It must be a decade ago called the video is An Inconvenient Truth, which was pretty good for their time. Another one is this thing here called creeping normalcy. We have to be aware of this. So in our advocacy, this is a process of which major change becomes acceptable when it happens gradually over time. So if the change is good for you and it happens slowly over time, that's good. But if it's bad for you and it happens slowly, you may not even notice that. And that's an example of climate change where the emissions keep growing, the weather damage keeps growing, and we don't deal with the problem. And we basically do what the governor of Texas said when that massive flood happened in Texas not long ago. He basically came out and when asked, well, is this flood, there's been a lot of these floods and, things. Is this climate change? And he basically said, no, we've had these things, forever. We've had for thousands of years. The climate has changed, the weather has changed. Okay, we're in a bad stint right now, but it'll be different. Next year, 5 years from now, things will get better. It has nothing to do with climate change. And I love this boiling the frogs analogy, even though it may not be scientifically true. Basically, you throw a frog in a pot of warm water, he will swim around and probably not jump out. But if you throw the frog in a pot of very hot water, he will immediately recoil and jump out. Now, whether that's true or not, I think it is a kind of a metaphor for the human condition in terms of how we respond sometimes. So, if you look at this little caption at the bottom, the frog is saying, relax, pot temperatures have been going up and down for centuries now. So, anyway, so let's move on. Now, this is the illusory truth. We come to believe what we hear if it's repeated enough times. So, in the little graph, which is probably not scientific, but it's an estimation, how true the lie is will depend on how many times you hear the lie. So, a lot of the same lies that you hear from the Trump administration today were said by those same people in 2015. And frankly, most of the Republican Party at the time thought it was, crap. It wasn't true, and they were brutal against Donald Trump about these things back then. But now these same things are still happening. There should be no surprise. He said it hundreds and maybe thousands of times, and a lot of people either believe or they line up and stay quiet, right? So this is important. So we have to, when something happens and a question is asked about the weather, we have to be prepared to say, yeah, we have a lot more billion-dollar disasters. We have 4 times as many now as we had back in the 1980s. We need to be able to show proof and graphs of these things because people don't see it. So this is a list, and I hope when I send the PDF out, you'll kind of print this, and in your own advocacy and things that you do as part of advocacy, you'll kind of have this handy and say, gee, in my awareness first step when I work with somebody, how can I frame, or what can these things do to guide me to frame these things in positive ways so I can be more effective? So that's the main point, because these things are used by our adversaries, our opponents right now. People know about these things and they use them every single day. So, and this looks like kind of a joke, this picture on the right-hand side. I got this from Chris Murphy on Facebook. But basically, there's no proof that global warming is really happening. So I'm not going to change my lifestyle. Well, the damage is now already done, and we'll have to adapt. Just build, seawalls and so forth. Now the car is going under, he's on the roof. Hydrogen and technology will save us. Well, technology's already saved us. We're just not using it. We've got the technology today. So, okay, now I'm going under and I'm going to die. Well, this is a climate tipping point. If this happens to us, is it going to be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? It's really unclear, but that's where we're heading. And it's happening faster and faster. In all the predictions from 10, 15, 20 years ago, it's happening a little bit faster than predicted. So as we go through now, let's look at these conspiracy theories and what's behind them. I've covered some of it already. Obviously, it relates, is contradictions. So, for example, on the one hand, a conspiracy theorist might say, well, COVID-19 is a minor issue. We don't need vaccines and all that stuff, no face masks. Or COVID-19 is an engineered extreme thing by the Chinese to kill Americans. Or distrust from official channels. The FBI, they're the deep state. And now, of course, they're not the deep state, but, they were the deep state a year ago in a lot of people's minds. Or nefarious intent, opposing groups act with malice or victimhood. We are persecuted truth seekers. We're the ones telling the truth. All the other people are lying. Or immune to evidence. Proof fact sheets, all that's great. These climate presentations, all this is great, but it's all a cover up. It's lies. And then some of the psychology behind this would be there's a need for certainty, as I said, simple answers, need for control of the situation, need for strict alignment for the cause. Maybe it's a vaccine cause or an anti-climate agenda, or we have a projection. I would lie, therefore they must be lying. And we're free to lie because we know those Democrats or whatever are lying. So I'm going to now talk about pre-bunking, and prevention is more effective than a cure. So when we think about the medical situation, a vaccine is intended to keep you from getting the disease, which is what we want, right? Now, if we get the disease, it's bad, we might die, and we're probably going to have all kinds of other medications as a result just to survive. So with pre-bunking, we're trying to get in front of it before we get the disease. Now, it's pretty hard these days, but we can do it. Pre-bunking is a process of proactively revealing lies, tactics, and sources before they strike. Now, I'm going to have to explain that because you may be thinking right now, it's already struck, it's already happened. We're in deep trouble already. But you don't have to have the deep trouble that we're in affect your advocacy and the way you do your advocacy. So there's more effective ways, and I'll show you why in a second. Pre-bunking reduces disinformation spread like a vaccine does with the medical situation. Pre-bunking shows people truth alongside of the lie in what's called a truth sandwich. And that's the key to pre-bunking properly is you have truth on either side of the lie, and you not only tell the truth, but you tell the lie. I'll show you the process in a second. You want to suffocate the lies. So pre-bunking is scalable to millions of people, and pre-bunking fades over time. And so we need to use tools like marketing our effort and massive repetition to drive belief, which is the reverse of the illusory truth that I talked about a slide or two ago. So here's the process. So in our advocacy, whether it's with a politician, a group of people, the Sierra Club, or whoever we're talking to, we give them the facts. We're not going to debunk the lie. We're going to start with the facts. Lead with the facts, make it clear, make it relevant, and make it sticky. Drive the logic and emotion. Now, we don't have to do this perfect because we're going to have a version 2 of the facts in just a second. So now what we do is we warn the people listening to us that there's a lot of disinformation out there and you're going to reveal the disinformation. It's very important to warn people that you are going to do it because they're thinking it already. Unless you all have all-in Democrats or something in the room, climate believers, if you are really trying to reach out to everybody, there's going to be people that aren't quite sure or disbelieve in the room. So we need to warn them. We're going to do disinformation. We're going to show it. We're going to flag it. We need to know all about their tactics. We have to address this information trust, disinfo trust, reveal the hidden agendas, and highlight basic disinformation tactics. This person said that. They're a paid disinformation advocate. That's what they do. They're paid. That's their job in life, disinformation on X. And then what we do is we put facts in a sandwich. We surround this information. We replace this information with correct information. We make correct info stickier than disinformation, and we cement it with the reverse illusory truth and we're sensitive to creeping normalcy in this whole thing. So if we do this now, if this seems different or alien to you, when I show you an example of this, I think you'll see why disinformation is not the way to go, and this is the way to go, although this is probably a bit different. So why is this effective to do this? Well, first of all, this truth sandwich, leading with facts, then addressing the lies, followed by the facts, is more effective than myth first, corrections. In other words, disinformation. It limits repetition of falsehood. It surrounds the lies with truth and ensures that the truth gets more airtime because you talk truth twice. The second truth is more thorough and impactful and emotional than the first one, which might be facts, just plain facts. It frames the audience recall too. People tend to remember what they hear first and what they hear last. And with the truth sandwich, they're going to hear truth first and they're going to hear truth last. And sandwiched in between is what we want people to know during the presentation that it's false and a lie, but then we don't want them to remember that. So psychological inoculation. With the truth sandwich, it provides a clear mental anchor about the truth. Then there's something called the continued influence effect. Research in psychology and communication shows that the truth sandwich approach reduces disinformation that lingers after a correction or a conversation. We don't want the lies to linger. We want the truth to linger days later. And then basically it's an alignment with something called inoculation theory alignment. It's a truth sandwich aligns with inoculation theory that has been tested in health, climate, and political contexts. Now, this guy that I'm referencing here, it's also part of the various psychological organizations. I'm not a psychologist, but I've learned a lot about psychology, frankly. Now, so in summary of this, and then I'll show some examples, conspiracy theories, myth, lies, and disinformation often stick because they seem simple. They are constantly repeated, illusory truth, and they meet simple emotional needs. Refer back to the change management slide, the simple needs. It's easy. It's easy. So the best defense is integrating human change understanding with the truth sandwich. So now I want to show some examples. So first of all, what not to do. This is debunking. This is not recommended. The concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive. Climate change is a hoax. President Donald J. Trump. Debunking, which this is the truth side. There is a 97% peer-reviewed scientific consensus that climate change driven by global warming will be catastrophic in coming years if we don't cut greenhouse gases right away. Now, the problem with this is if this lie is put on social media and you debunk it with what I just did up there, you will propel the lie 10 to 100 times more than if you use pre-bunking as an approach. What you want with pre-bunking is you want to come across with truth first and let them debunk you. In other words, you don't on social media, you don't have to be the one to say the lie. They're going to come in and try and debunk you. They will propel your truth 10 to 100 times farther out. So here's some examples. So here's a simple one. Truth one, the pre-bunk. The climate is changing and caused by human-caused emissions of greenhouse gases. The lie. Many important people claim that climate is not changing or simply changing, from natural causes, I should say there. For example, look at how ice shelves in Antarctica are gaining ice. The truth, 97% of climate scientists accept the fact that humans are causing global warming and climate change, according to NASA. For example, the National Academy of Science, American Meteorological Association, American Lung Association, and perhaps 100 other top organizations. Now, as a part of this, you may also follow up with maybe a slide like this showing icons of the various reputable organizations that people respect generally today. You might want to show slides, full screen versions of these 4 slides. Let me just tell you, the emissions are going up. They're accumulating in the atmosphere. The temperature is rising. And the billion-dollar disasters are not only increasing in number, but the impact in terms of cost to people you and me, and our insurance costs and so forth are going up. So here's 5 more things as an example of pre-bunking that you might want to do. I'm not going to go through these here today, and this is my version of the truth. Okay, I've researched these things, and this is probably reasonable truth. So this isn't pre-bunking here. This is suggestions that you might use in your advocacy. Now I want to show solution disinformation. Here's one for energy. Solar panels are safe for the environment and for families. The lie, solar panels cause cancer. Believe it or not, that's out there. Truth two, solar panels do not emit ionizing radiation. Also, EMF levels are lower than household appliances. There's no credible evidence that solar panels cause cancer. This is a false claim perpetuated by those that are trying to stop the deployment of low-cost energy for families. Again, maybe you could do better than I did here. I'm just giving you some ideas. And then here's 6 more for energy. We don't have time to go through them tonight. And here's another 6 more for a total of 12 different examples in this. For example, one of them here is that wind power, wind turbines, kill birds. Well, they do. But cats kill more birds, fossil fuels kill more birds, and buildings kill more birds. And we have to be creative about this, like Norway is, and they're painting one of the blades in a wind farm, in a wind turbine, black, which apparently wards off birds. Now, if that works, that's a great thing. Now, I want to show you a couple in transportation. So what in transportation should be focused on? Well, for example, light-duty vehicles. You can see that of the 28% of emissions, which is the #1 source of emissions in the United States, light-duty vehicles are 59% of that. Trucks and buses are 24%. Aircraft, rail, and ships are minor. Now, of course, a ship is much bigger than your car, but there's 280 million cars. And we should get rid of as many cars as possible, but if we're going to have them, they need to be zero-emission vehicles. Okay, so here's the truth. Electric vehicles have smaller carbon footprint than gas cars. Oh no, electricity can come from polluting coal power plants. EV batteries produce emissions for sourcing and manufacturing them. Therefore, EVs are worse for the environment than gas-powered vehicles. Truth. Well, first, for a clean grid, the first item, it takes 6 months fueled by renewables, like hydropower, solar, wind, and nuclear, to equal a Toyota Corolla. So in other words, you drive an EV for 6 months, and now you're emissions free for the next 12 years. 6 months, that's all it takes. Now, on the average energy grid, though, it takes 1 year. In other words, 15,000 miles for that car to equal a Toyota Corolla to reach carbon parity. And number 3, a dirty grid, 100% coal. Still, the EV's less emissions, but it does take 5 years. But then the next 8 or 10 years will be clean. So obviously we want to move away from coal, but you get the idea. They like to bend the truth. Or how's this? Modern EVs cost less than gas cars. Oh no, no way. Look at the cost of Chevy Equinox gas car compared to the EV version. The EV costs $5,600 more. 59% more than 59% of American people are right that EVs cost way too much money. Truth, no. The Equinox EV costs $8,700 less than the gas version if you consider the total cost of ownership. In other words, not just the MSRP to buy the thing, but what's it going to cost you for fuel over the time you keep the car, like 8 years, and how long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost in maintenance and repair costs? So anyway, there's for the sake of time, there's a spreadsheet that I'll be including in this that you can look at this and the calculations behind it. I use nothing but Argonne National Laboratory numbers to calculate these things. Now, I'm gonna skip over this and kind of move along now. But there in the PDF, you have some examples. One is that batteries, of course, are terrible for EVs, but you can see the recall rate on batteries now are 0.1% as far as battery replacements go. Here's five more disinformation versus truth in electric vehicles. And here's a total of nine. So as we think about our own, advocacy, developing education and awareness up front, in order to be able to get desire and knowledge and ability and reinforcement, that's a process. If we don't get the right kind of awareness, if we don't appeal to the change management things that I brought up earlier, and if we don't use the pre-bunking and the truth sandwich approach to our advocacy, then it's going to be more difficult to get beyond awareness. We can keep trying and trying. So if people don't show up for meetings or they're not interested, it's probably something I covered tonight. Something to think about, I hope. So to summarize, if we do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always gotten. So don't succumb to the status quo bias. And that applies for how we do advocacy. We have to be willing to change just like we expect our opponents and adversaries to change. Pre-bunking is a proactive tool that combats disinformation. The illusory truth is a tool that cements and propels the message forward. Pre-bunking and change management are not magic bullets. They are tools that must be integrated into our advocacy and education. Use of the pre-bunking, the truth sandwich, to surround and expose disinformation. Use it. Our cause is complex, so we have to use the best practices to focus on the projects that can yield as close as possible to get to our 50% cutting of emissions by 2030 and net zero by 2050. 2030, I think, is out of the question now, but we have to do the very best that we can. So we have to be willing to change ourselves as well as how we go about our advocacy. And finally, we need to, the bottom line is we need to stop burning things right now. So that's really it. Thank you for listening. There's about 19 minutes left of the meeting. I'm going to stop the share. Whoops. I did something wrong here. Stop the share. Ooh, there we go. All right. I guess we're in the Q&A phase right now. I hope you got something out of this. I know it sounds a little complicated, a little different. We got to be prepared to at least be receptive to these things. And the main thing about it is we should start talking to each other about these things. How can we use some of these things in our advocacy? So Monday, I'll be talking to our leadership team about, what part of this seems interesting or usable and what part of it's not. And why is that? Questions?
I was just thinking, Tom, about how you could, uh, I could see how when you were making a presentation, you could use the truth sandwich because you would have the facts in front of you to put around the lie.
Yeah.
What the hard part is when you're just in an informal conversation with somebody and you don't happen to have the facts right there.
Yeah.
And and then how do you do that is what I kept thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, that was the first question at the Washington, D.C. meeting last night. They brought that up, and that comes up all the time. And I think it really comes down to, um, like I'm very strong with solar panels and EVs, right? So I'm going to be fine, you know. But if somebody were to ask me a question about regenerative agriculture, I'm going to say, that's a really good thing. It's important. We can change the 10% of emissions and we can turn that into a sink and absorb a lot of our emissions. But beyond that, we would need people like you and Don really to be in the conversation. So I think we have to get qualified people. I think we can have an education program, Pam, that can give some of the basics to everybody. Everybody should have the basics, especially climate change, right? But they might not be expert on RA or EVs. Rachel, you had your hand up.
Yeah, if I could also just chime in on the thread that Pam started. Um, I think you're absolutely right, Tom, that nobody can be an expert in
Yeah,
everything. That's way too high of a bar. But one thing that I do want to emphasize is once you um, have some knowledge in some subset of climate related stuff, practicing talking about it with different kinds of people. It's
yeah,
practice that gets you in the position to do the kind of truth sandwich approach or whatever approach you come up with. We are not good at talking about things that we haven't talked about before. We're not good at talking about things with this group if we only ever talk about it with this other kind of group. Like this is a kind of middle school speech team um, insight, which is we get better at talking about stuff by practicing talking about that stuff. So this is an invitation to everybody who's on the call, whether you want to get more involved in climate reality or in
yeah,
some other group. To get better at talking about climate change, you have to talk about climate change. You have to practice it. And so if you want help practicing, or if you want help getting opportunities to practice, that's something that we as a chapter can work with you to get so you can build your skills.
yeah.
But the skills don't just pop out of nowhere. You have to practice.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, Rachel. And when we think about it, I think there were five examples of climate change. I think we all have to be expert at those. We don't have to know the details about beyond it, but we have to know what people are thinking. I do think I had, I think, three or four examples for electric vehicles. Those are simply basic things because people are going to say to you, the batteries die and they cost $10,000 a piece. Well, I don't think I got a chance to, because of time, I didn't get a chance to go into the reason why. But you'll see in the slides, if 59% of people think something, everybody should probably know that. Now, there may be, a whole bunch of things that you don't have to be an expert on, but there's certain things like an EV costs more to buy, $4,000 more. The average EV is now only $4,000 more. So that's something probably everybody should know about. And I think beyond that, I think you can say, wait a minute, it's the fueling is where you're going to save the money after you get the car. And it's the maintenance because there's almost no parts in an EV, compared to a gas car. So I think there's some basic things we all, I think Rachel's right, should know about that. But there could be points where we need to call in some help. Hobie.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That's really great stuff. I had two kind of related thoughts. The first is that as climate activists, we're sort of frontal lobe driven, often, relying on our facts and reasons and that sort of thing. And there's one thing I caution people about because I react very often when somebody says something like, well, EVs aren't as good as internal combustion cars. And I might say, just as a natural reaction, um, EVs or internal combustion cars are not more efficient than EVs. And what I'm doing there, I saw you cited George Lakoff, is quoting a title of one of his books. Whenever you use the term not, your brain doesn't hear that. And
Oh, wow.
and so one of the titles of his book, and I'll try it here with the group, is I want everybody in the group here to not think of an elephant right now. Do not think of an elephant. Okay? So what you're thinking of is an elephant. And I could say, do not think of a pink elephant. And now you're thinking of some Disney film you once saw as a kid. Um, so it's better rather than saying something is not this, windmills, wind turbines do not cause cancer. All the brain is hearing is cancer and wind turbines until we repeat it over and over enough. And we did that with clean coal by saying coal is not clean. And it's not in I mean, it's not logical. We kind of, imagine that we're rational and we hear that word not, but we don't actually. So just keep that in mind when you're debunking.
We can say it's
Um,
dirty though, right?
right, absolutely. A direct statement, subject, verb, object, or whatever. Coal is toxic. You know, uh,
Yeah.
gasoline engines are inefficient. Make the statement that way as opposed to using the negative there. But more than that, I would add to this, yeah, we do need to debunk misinformation, but I will tell you that I got a plug-in hybrid 4 months ago, and I really, really like it. It gets about 50 miles, on a charge around town. And I didn't realize it, but I hadn't put a tank of gas in it for the first 3 months that I owned it.
Yeah.
And my wife feels really good about that because she doesn't like going to the gas station because it's kind of dangerous at night or when she's coming back from volunteering. And it's just really great. I'm really pleased with it. Now, analyzing that, I'm just telling you a story about my experience of efficiency as opposed to arguing whether one is better than another. And I think that appeals a lot to people. So I would always advise keeping a story in your back pocket about whatever subject, because people resonate with the stories more. Even when we're trying to debunk sometimes, I think we're into the weeds and the facts too much in the process, although it can be done very well. So anyway, that was two related things there.
Yeah,
And
I
I do
think
really like my EV.
I think you're right. And I had two plug-in hybrids, by the way. But now you don't really need to do that now because the range is great, you know. Anyway, I understand where you're coming from. Not burning gas is the key thing. Anyway, any other questions? Geez, are we going to end a few minutes early? Whoa. Pam, you want to say anything about the the political situation today and what's coming up?
Oh, well, just for our chapter,
Yeah.
our focus is going to be on the Illinois General Assembly that goes back into session in January. And we're going to start meeting a legislative team of volunteers, and we're always hoping for more. So if you haven't volunteered yet, you can still join. We're starting up again September 30th to plan for the January session, figure out what bills we want to push, what we really care about, and then we're going to be meeting monthly and trying to alert our chapter members to all the important legislation that is in front of us that we think needs to be lobbied for in the spring session. And it only goes January to the end of May, so it's a limited time frame in which to get these things done. So we've got a lot of really important bills. I do have to tell you about one of them that's brand new, and I really hope it gets some airtime. I didn't even know about this until a few days ago. This is called a private right of action bill, and it's being introduced under the name Extreme Weather Recovery Act. And what it does is it allows a small business or a person to sue the fossil fuel industry for damages, like personal damages or damages to my business. Um, and it allows, it basically provides an environment in which it is okay and supported to take out lawsuits against the industry in Illinois, which is really important as a starting point for political action in our state. There are a few other states that are also taking action on this. They're not surprisingly the blue states, but we think there'll be action in Hawaii and Washington State and a couple other places. And here's the really interesting thing. These laws contain provisions for the insurance industry to take out lawsuits against the fossil fuel industry. Because what's happening is insurance companies are just getting eaten alive by disaster recovery insurance claims. And so they are trying to either pull out of certain areas of the country where they don't want to have to pay for all these damages, or they're paying and losing money. So this law, if we could, and it's just being developed right now, this law would allow insurance companies in our state to hold fossil fuel companies liable for the damages to their industry. I'm excited about this. I think this could have great potential here. And it would give you a big industry, insurance, that actually was on our side
Yeah,
rather
Pam,
than just, yeah.
I'm gonna jump in on Pam's legislative stuff before I pass it over to James. I know you have your hand there. Um, I just want to let folks know that yes, we're planning for January. That's really important work. But the Illinois legislature does have a veto session coming up in October, and there are two really, really important bills that we absolutely must get passed in October.
Yeah.
One of them relates to public transit, which is important for so many people getting to their jobs and just living their life. But of course, public transit is also an essential climate change solution. So that is a gotta win. And similarly, we have a gotta win bill that's an omnibus bill about the electric grid. And it includes a lot of provisions
Yeah.
that are going to be really important for keeping energy affordable, making pricing fair throughout the state, and shifting more resources towards efficiency and cleaner power sources over time. So both the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act and the big transit bill that I forget the name of it right off the top of my head. Both of those are really must-win bills in the veto session in October. So stay tuned about how you can support, how you
Right.
can contact legislators
Yep.
in various ways. These are must-wins, but I'll pass it over to James.
Yeah, James, go ahead. You're on mute, James.
You're on mute, James.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Tom, it's a terrific talk,
Thanks.
analysis, and Rachel and Pam, of course. I just wanted to mention, I've been reluctant to debate, and I'm a scientist, okay? So when I've done talks on this, I usually don't have too much problems in the audience because they believe me. But uh, but I've had people who wanted to debate me, but I'm very wary to debate deniers because I think you get caught in what's called a gish gallop. And so what's your thought about if you know you're up against a hardcore denier that wants to debate you, what should you do?
Well, I don't know if he's going to give you real time to make your case. That's one thing. I would do it, but if they're going to give you 2 minutes and he takes four, I don't know. So whoever's the host for this, I think would be important and what the commitment is. But I mean, scientists are having problems. Maybe not here, James, where you are, but it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem.
Mhm. Yeah, no. Well, anyways, thank you so much. This is
Yeah, sure. Anybody else? Just about out of time. Last comment?
If you do want to join the legislative action team, it
Yes.
it it is really an open, just let me know. I'll put my name my email in the chat.
Yeah. And if anybody else wants to talk with me about the subject tonight, we could get a group of people together to really try and hash out how we can utilize some of these concepts. The enemy's doing it. The opponents and adversaries are using a lot of these things. So the question is, what can we do? All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care.